Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about emotional charge and how it's a concept that, if understood and leveraged correctly, can lead to a long-term increase in your win rate. So let's dive in. So I want you to imagine that this beaker represents both your mind and your being. And just like this beaker, your being and your mind only are able to facilitate a certain amount of emotions until they are overwhelmed. This metaphor is clearly represented on the poker table, where it's very, very common to experience tilt. And all tilt really is most of the time is that our emotions ramp up, they get too much, and we pass what is called our tilt threshold. Emotional charge refers to the current set point of our emotions, and it's really, really simple. The more charged up we are emotionally, the higher our emotional charge set point is. And the higher up we go, the more overwhelmed we can become. It's more likely that we're going to tilt. So easy, keep it simple. The more emotionally charged equals the more likelihood to tilt. Which obviously isn't good. However, if we can learn to understand this emotional charge set point, we can actually leverage this to learn how to make better decisions and actions in game. And if we make better decisions and actions in game, it leads to what? An increased win rate, an overall increase in the quality of life, and all of the things that we are on a mission to achieve on this channel. If that sounds like you're not already subscribed, please do so. This is not a skill that can be learned overnight. It's going to take time to practice and train and get comfortable with understanding your emotions and understanding your emotional charge point. But if you can do this, it's a really, really great skill to learn, and it's going to separate you from the rest of the field. And I personally believe that long term, this is going to be the thing that really differentiates the biggest winners and losers in the game. So now we know more about emotional charge and the set point and how this works. I want to give a real life example of a nightmare session that I played last week and show you in real time exactly how my emotional set point was changing and how it was influencing actions. And then right at the end of this example, I'll show you how exactly we can leverage this information, this emotional set point information, to make really good decisions and ultimately win more cash money. So let's dive into it. So how this is going to work is I'm going to go through this session. I'm going to pick out key hands and talk about how subjectively they influence my emotional charge set point. And what I want you to realize is this is not a strategy video. There's probably going to be leaks in here, maybe some mistakes on the logical, strategic side of the game. That's not the intention of this video, so don't focus on that. Don't get hung up on the nitty-gritty. Just focus on how subjectively this was happening, and then see if you can relate the feelings I was experiencing and this whole narrative that I was experiencing and the decisions that I was making and wasn't making. See if you can relate that to something in your own game, because if you can do that, it will increase your understanding of emotional set point and you'll learn how to leverage it that bit quicker. So the session starts with this hand. Very, very standard spot. We open ace king off in the cutoff. Button 3 bets, we 4 bet, he rips, we call. We run the cards out, he wins, we only run it once. And this isn't really a hand that influenced my emotional charge set point consciously, but maybe subconsciously it did. And it's probably something that's going to influence a decision later on. For the next 90 or so minutes, we really didn't have many important or interesting spots. There was a lot of just calling pre-flop and folding on flops. There was a lot of c-betting and taking it down. Nothing really interesting happened, and while that's pretty normal in poker, I was streaming this, and that adds another layer that you may not experience. But when you're streaming and there's no action and it's kind of boring, it adds to the emotional charge of like, why am I doing this? Is anybody going to watch? And that lasted for about 90 minutes, so it was starting to build the charge point of like that frustration of no action, not winning, will anybody watch? And that's important to note. You might not deal with that yourself, but that was happening for me. We then come to this hand, which is going to start to show how the emotional charge can influence decisions, because as I just said, I was kind of frustrated with no action, and this spot comes up. I'm in the small blind, button opens, I 3 bet, he min 4 bets, I call with the intention of seeing a good flop. I had history with this guy, I know that he can 4 bet wide, but this is still a marginal spot. You don't have to take these every time, but we see this flop, he bets around half pot, and we have the decision to either shove or fold. We called the 4 bet pre with the intention of getting it in on good boards. this is a good board, so we take the action of shoving. We run into pretty much the top of his range. He has queens. He probably also has kings here and aces and some random ace-3 straight draw things that's going to call. He's going to fold a lot of other stuff too. So this isn't like an omega punt, but the narrative is starting to build. You know, my emotional charge of being that little bit frustrated and maybe trying to force action for the stream is starting to show, and it's led to this decision. A marginal spot. Did I have to take it? Maybe, maybe not. Next big pot is this one. We open pre, big blind defends. We bet flop. He calls. The turn's a brick. We bet. He shoves for like 44 bigs. He's a short stacker. We call it off. Pretty obviously standard. We get it in ahead. He rivers a winner. And again, this isn't like a super massive emotionally charged event, but building on what's already happening, this is starting to really buy into that narrative of like, this isn't a good session. Things aren't going well. You're running bad. Rivers are going against you. And that's important to note for later on. Then the session progressed into a lot of hands like this, where we 3-bet pre-flop with premium hands like aces, and the board textures are just things like this. Super wet, out of position, very difficult to play, and very difficult to get paid, and this just kept happening. So the emotional charge is now building, and I was consciously aware of this in session. You know, I can feel the frustration starting to grow, and seemingly every single hand is piling up to complete that narrative, which is again important for later on. But I hope you're starting to see the picture of how this charge can build and how the events can stack up on top of each other to get you close to that tilt threshold. We then get this hand where we open under the gun, small blind 3-bets. We decide to flat pre-flop, which is pretty standard in these positions in 6 max when people are playing relatively tight ranges, small blind versus under the gun. 4-betting's probably an option, but we flat. We flop super good. We bet, and we take a turn with a pot size bet left behind. We decide to play a trap in position after he checks. He's either drawing pretty much dead, or we have the same hand, or we're drawing dead and he has aces. We also have the ace of clubs, which does change a few things, but I did play a trap. This guy's also super spewy, and we see the queen river. He checks. We decide to play all the biscuits, and we rip. We run into it. He has queens. So again, the charge point is rising. That story of the rivers just aren't going well for us is really starting to galvanize and become a real thing in my mind, even though obviously in the real world the RNG doesn't care, the other players don't care, it's just going on. And here the emotional charge is rising, and this is a very common theme and very common thing that can happen in game. A short while later we get this hand. Button opens. We 3-bet 9s out of the big blind. Again, it can go either way. I have history of this player. He's super wide on the button. I'm doing this for value. Flop comes pretty good. We flop an open-ender, and we like what we see. We c-bet. He goes for a raise, which is kind of strange in these positions, but I don't really see much value in raising myself. I'm going to have a lot of whiffs here that he's probably attacking. You know, I'm probably going to be c-betting a lot of broadways that miss, and he raises. We decide to play a flat, which seems fine. A king comes on turn, and we play a block. I'm not sure if this is strategically the best, but in-game it seemed like the cheapest way to get to the river and realize all of our equity. I didn't really see him doing too much raising on the turn unless he has sets. This is maybe a mistake, but it is what it is. It's the decision we made. He calls, and the river's a jack, which is pretty much the bingo card for us. We roll out him having ace-queen. I don't think he ever raises ace-queen in position on the flop. So we pretty much have the nuts straight. The nuts, we beat all of his sets and 2 pairs now. And as I said on stream, he can have queen 9 suited here, which is pretty brutal, but we have a pot size bet left. We jam, and as the story of the session seems to go, and even recording it back now, I can see how the emotional charge logically rose. We just run into the absolute nuts. He does, well, not the absolute nuts, he has ace-queen, but effectively the nuts, he has queen 9. And when we have pocket 9s, we block all of that. And this is a big pot as well. This is like 154 effective pre-flop, which is a lot, you know. In terms of win rate, it's going to be difficult to gain those chips back. And these are big spots, big swings. So we run into it again. And at this point, I can really start to feel the charge getting close to that threshold. Then we get to the next hand. We're playing against probably the spewiest player on the table. We've seen him do loads of crazy things. We 4-bet aces, very, very standard. He flats out of position. Flop is super good for us. We also have the ace of clubs. We start off with a small bet. He calls. The turn isn't that clean, and my reasoning in-game is the exact same reasoning as I choose now, is that we have the ace of clubs, which is relevant as it's blocked some of his nut flush draws, and it's harder for him to get it in on river when it is a club if he has us beat. And this is the player type that's just going to whack it in on river on most bricks. We've got to give him the rope. We only have a pot size bet left with the effective stack. So we play a check with that intention. The river is the biggest brick, as I say on stream here, and he finds the shove. This is like the most primo spot. We've been waiting for this. Probably playing against this guy for well over an hour on stream and literally doing so much folding. He was pipping us pretty much every time, and it just so happens that he has just the raw pocket sixes for a river to set. At this point, as you can maybe imagine, maybe watching this back and experiencing this with me, you can see how the emotional charge is getting really up there, and it's likely that many players would already be tilting by this time. I understand that, and that's why I said this comes with practice. I'm human too. It did start to feel that way, but as I said at the start of this video, if you can learn to leverage this set point and build awareness around it, you can know that the tilt is maybe coming because you know that you're getting close to that threshold, which means that decisions moving forward, if you just take a deep breath and realize that you're close to that threshold and your set point is high and you're emotionally charged, then any decisions that maybe could be tilt, you can stop making. And this may become more obvious exactly what I'm talking about when we get dealt this hand. And this was near the end of the stream. I knew at this point I was stuck at least 5 buy-ins. I don't usually track. Like if I was playing off stream, I probably wouldn't track in real time. But when you're on stream, it's slightly different for the viewership, etc. But I knew I was stuck 5 buy-ins. I knew I wasn't going to make it back because I only had about 10 minutes left of the stream. We get kings. And we 3-bet out the big blind, cut off calls. We see a good flop, especially because we have the king of diamonds. We bet. He calls. The turn's pretty much a brick, unless he has, ace 3 or something pocket 2s, but it's pretty much a brick. We bet, and he calls, and then we get this river. And visually, this is one of the worst rivers. It's an ace, it's an overcard, it completes some straights, flushes get there. And with the narrative of this whole session, my emotional set point is way up there, and I'm charged up, and I'm in that mindset of like all the rivers are going against me. This just isn't my day. That's what's running through my mind, and I can hear that. I'm aware of that. But this is where the leverage of emotional set point comes in, because I am aware of that, and I do know that's going on. So we check, which is standard, and he shoves. Now, previous versions of me, and for many years, would have just clicked fold like very quickly here and just chalked it off as like, oh, it's the worst river card in the deck. I have ran bad all session. This just isn't my day, and then just closed it down and moved on and lost the 45 big blinds that I put in here. But because of this heightened awareness and knowledge of emotional charge and tilt threshold, I gave myself some space. And whilst on stream I visually probably looked tilted because I was really close, I just took a really exaggerated breath out. And he gave me that space to be like, okay, let's think about this. Let's think about how this river card really interacts with his range. And I gave myself that space to think and not listen to all of the emotional charge that was going on, even though it's hard and even though it's like really in your mind and it's something you want to listen to. I was like, I've got to give myself space. I've got to give myself time to think through this. And when I did so, I came to reason with the fact that this card isn't actually that bad for me, and it's more likely that he's just going to bluff shove because it's a good card probably to bluff on versus people who are emotionally charged and not giving themselves space to think. But with that breath and with that space, I came to the conclusion that I had to call this one off. And I call, and he shows the raw pocket sixes for a bluff. And that felt really good in the moment. My exuberant celebration on stream, yes, big, was maybe a bit much. But as I said, it was big. And this was big for me because I've been practicing this. As I said, I'm human too. I'm not perfect. And when you start to get this right and start to leverage it, your threshold, your tilt threshold actually goes up and your awareness is heightened, and you start to actually get better emotional control, and the emotional charge doesn't dictate your actions or decisions as often because you're training yourself to act in this way. So this final hand was like the icing on the cake of a really difficult session, and I had all of this emotional charge and this story and this baggage built up, and it was kind of like a test given to me of like, will I stick to my guns? Will I actually use the awareness and the tools, the breathing, all of these things that I talk about on this channel to actually give myself the room to make the right decision? And I did this time. And this is only one example. It's only one stream. I'm only one person. And it may look like a small thing, may look like a standard spot, but if you're honest with yourself and you actually look at the numbers and realize all of these small things are going to add up, and this emotional charge and understanding how it's impacting your decision making is so important if you want to be a long-term winner in the game. Because if you keep taking these decisions based on emotion and based on having a high charge point rather than, you know, not doing it that way, long term, you're just going to hemorrhage money. You know, you're just going to lose so much more money than you need to based on that emotional charge. And I really do think that this will be a defining factor between long-term winners and losers, because there is a lot hinging on strategy for sure, but there's also a hell of a lot hinging on your emotional charge set point understanding and not letting it be the thing that dictates your actions and decisions. It's been valuable. I hope it's given you a different way to maybe think about your decisions in game. Maybe it's given some context to the way that you've been feeling and how you're just randomly making these decisions that you're not sure about. It's probably to do with your charge set point, and it's likely that if you're tilting, you're just going way past your threshold. So if you found value here, please let me know in the comments. I really appreciate you watching this, and I'll see you next time. Much love. Peace.